Chapter 641 War 3. Looks like that's my cue. The last thing Han Yufei heard was Liam's voice as he landed softly on the ground after leaping past the fortifications. In less than a second, a terrifying energy swept through the area and headed toward the lower levels of the castle. Because the energy was so powerful, Han Yufei found that it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to breathe. The only thing that he could do while that was happening was just watch as the energy came smashing against the lower floors, right where Liam landed. Boom. Following the deafening sound of the explosion, thick dust billowed into the air and obscured Han Yufei's and everyone else's vision. As soon as the dust settled down, Han Yufei was once again able to catch a glimpse of Liam, who appeared to be unharmed for the most part. His gaze and the demon above met, and in that instant time came to a standstill. His figure disappeared after that, reappearing right in front of the demon that had produced the terrifying attack, and he slashed with his sword. Clay. A droning, metallic sound reverberated through the space above, and it continued to do so for a few seconds. The two of them immediately began to fight one another as powerful shockwaves erupted into the atmosphere. While this was happening, the demons that were previously standing still finally decided to move. The orcs responded in kind as they brandished their weapons and roared. Ruar. Heck. Hararg. As a direct result of their movements, meteor-like objects of enormous proportions began to shoot in the air, heading toward the demons in the distance, signaling the beginning of the war. Instantly, agonized and pained screams started to engulf the entire battlefield. In this case, the screams were mostly from the demons that were taken down by the enormous boulders which were launched from the catapults at the front of the castle. Thousands upon thousands of demons would get swept up by that single attack from the catapult. However, despite the fact that a great number of demons were being killed with each attack, a new row of them would appear from behind them, replacing the previous row and continuing their advance. Their number seemed endless. This is not good. Han Yufei muttered inwardly as he gazed toward the distance. Despite everything that the orcs were doing in trying to get rid of as many demons as possible, it was evident that their efforts were futile as the number of demons approaching their direction was simply far too many. Compared to the Orson army, the demons were at least 20x their size. The battle wasn't one that had much hope of victory from the very beginning. Nonetheless, I guess it's our turn to finally let loose. Han Yufei suddenly heard Hein's voice coming from beside him. Like, he brought his fists together violently, which resulted in a droning, metallic noise being produced. Ava, who was standing next to him, played a few notes on her flute in a casual manner. Toodle-too. What followed after her simple actions was a scene that left Han Yufei and the others in awe. No matter how many times I see this, I'll never get used to it. It was simply not something that could be explained with a single word, as four enormous mammoth-like creatures appeared beneath the castle. Beside them stood a number of enormous wolves that were at least twice as tall as a typical human being. And standing behind them were large creatures that resembled armadillos but had spikes on their tough backs and possessed a fierce and menacing appearance that would make anyone's hair stand. If that wasn't enough, above them were large birds that flew around them and circled around them. In total, there were about 20 or 40 plus creatures standing in front of the castle. Their rank and presence were all incredibly strong. A one-man army. That was what Ava was. She was a one-man army. Toodle-too. With yet another flute blow, the beasts became enraged and charged the approaching demons. What's this? Beasts. What's hap-hyuk? Wherever they went, demons would be swept away as the mammoth-like creatures at the front destroyed everything in their way, acting as the path clearers, while the armadillos at the back cleaned everything that was left behind, with the wolves supporting the mammoth from the sides with their fast speeds and sharp claws. The coordination between the beasts was flawless and impeccable, getting rid of hundreds of demons at the time. Ava's impact wasn't any weaker than an S-ranked individual. Hein, who was obviously slower than them, trailed them from behind, slowly lagging behind with the passing of time. His figure was rather pitiful. Even then, Han Yufei didn't think much of it. He knew just how terrifying the current Hein was if he actually tried. I should also start my attack. When Han Yufei saw that everyone else had already moved ahead of him and was attacking the demons, he was no longer able to contain himself and he leaped down from the fortification. Upon landing, the only thing that met his sight was rotting flesh and cracked cores that closely resembled broken shards. There was nothing else. This was obviously the fallout from what Hein and the others had left behind. Ping. He extended his hand toward his right and a large sword that was double his size appeared in his hand. The sword did not have a particularly pleasing appearance. Rather, it resembled a sharp bone that had been shaped into a large broadsword. Because it was not an artifact, the power that emanated from it did not appear to be particularly impressive. It was, in fact, just a bone. But not just a regular bone. Hu. Han Yufei took a deep breath. Martial body. The veins in his muscles began to protrude as his muscles began to swell. His strength increased significantly and steam began to slowly escape his body. His presence started to attract the attention of the distant demons, but if that wasn't all, boom. When he took a single step forward, the previously enlarged muscles in his body contracted to the point where he became leaner. Han Yufei effortlessly raised the large sword in his hand with one hand while creating a crater beneath him with a single step. Contrary to what one might believe, practicing the Gravar style did not make one larger. No, rather it made them leaner. The whole point of the Gravar style was to compress all of the muscles within the body for greater explosiveness. The focus was on muscle density. The denser the muscles, the more explosive you were with your attacks. And currently Han Yufei's muscles were contracted to the point he felt his body overflow with power. Huu. By the time the sword was raised above his head, over 100 demons had already reached him. Completely unfazed by the demon's appearance, Han Yufei muttered a single word. Collapse. He then slashed down with the sword. His vision distorted momentarily, and all of the demons in his vicinity vanished. Even the typical black rain that would come out from a massacre did not appear, as everything simply vanished from around him. The scene was so shocking that it felt as though nothing had happened. If not for the long scar that traced for over a kilometer and was several meters in depth, one might have believed that nothing really had happened. But something did really happen. Who? Han Yufei exhaled as the tip of his sword touched the ground. Staring into the distance, he murmured. For a regular slash, this wasn't bad. Amanda used one hand to grab hold of the necklace that was draped around her neck, and she used the other hand to maintain her hold on the bow. As long as she wore the artifact, she was able to sense a warming sensation rising from the area just above her chest. It's time that I remove this. Even though she was hesitant, Amanda was aware that the time had come for her to stop concealing her abilities. She carefully unhooked the necklace from her neck. Almost immediately, she noticed that her strength was shifting, and she also noticed that her hair was beginning to flutter as the mana in the air began to warp. The whole process took no longer than 5 seconds, and by the time she was done, she felt her strength rise all the way to S- rank. The feeling. It was completely different from before, as she felt all of her senses become enhanced while her control over the mana became significantly easier. In the same manner as Jean, Amanda made it a point to make full use of all of the resources that were at her disposal. In contrast to Jean, who refused to use the skills and arts for reasons such as his pride, Amanda in the past refused to take on such powerful skills because she felt that the guild needed it more than she did. She had a tendency to prioritize the guild matters over her own interests at times, and if her father hadn't pointed this out to her, she would never have realized. In any case, even without this realization, Amanda would have changed her ways, particularly with what happened to her father and on that planet. In the end, the thing that she took away from all of these experiences was the realization that she was still far too weak and that she needed to work on becoming stronger. Hence why she started to prioritize her own self-interests and decided to become a little bit more selfish. At the end of the day, one needed to have a little bit of selfishness in order to get what one desired. There's a lot of demons. Staring into the distance, Amanda's brows furrowed. From where she was, she could see the members of Ren's group completely dominating the lower levels of the tower. Wherever they went, demons would be killed. Their presence completely took over the lower levels, but it's not enough. From where she was, Amanda could see that there were simply way too many demons to deal with at the same time. Despite the fact that they were dealing with them at an alarming rate, it was still far from enough. Amanda knew that she had to do something. Hence, she slowly took a stance and raised her bow. Hoo! She inhaled deeply, closed her eyes for a fleeting instant, and focused on the mana that was housed within her body before drawing her bow. A soft glow began to envelop her entire body at the same time that a blue translucent arrow began to form on her bow. Opening her eyes once more, she shifted her gaze toward the far distance, where the demon army was before mumbling something under her breath. Count ranked, agility type, ambush type. Target lock. Non-combat ability that allows the user to filter and select specific targets based on user-defined criteria. The greater the number of targets selected, the heavier the mana consumption. The skill's activation altered her view as everything started to change right before her very eyes, and over 100 different red dots appeared in her vision. All of which were targets that perfectly fit the criteria that she had selected beforehand. A thin smile formed on her face when she saw all of the targets. Her back arched backward and she released the string of her bow. Instantly, the arrow in her bow disappeared into the sky. The speed at which it flew was so fast that it released a small shockwave. While the arrow kept rising in the air, Amanda lowered her head and once again turned her attention toward the battlefield. She lowered her bow and waited for a couple of seconds before murmuring something under her breath. Boom! It was then that it happened. A rain of blue arrows shot at terrifying speeds toward the ground like the heavy rain of a storm. Each perfectly aimed for the demon that she had previously selected, leaving nothing but death behind. Chapter 642 War for. As Liam lifted his head to gaze into the sky, where he saw a magnificent figure floating, he mused to himself. How powerful! Not even Rin would be able to put this kind of pressure on him. At the very least, based on how he felt during his battles with him. Both he and Rin never engaged in a full-scale conflict with one another. They had reached a point where their strength would cause the destruction of everything in their vicinity. Their training room, which was built using the most durable equipment available to humankind, could no longer withstand the full brunt of their attacks, preventing the two of them from ever going all out. That being said, Liam had his eyes, and from there he could measure the force hidden within an individual. I'm afraid he's even stronger than Rin. And not by a small margin. The entirety of the battleground was shrouded in darkness as Liam's vision started to distort at the presence of the demon in front of him. Bah, thump, bah, thump. Liam could feel his heart beating at his throat as he continued to stare at the enemy before him. It also seemed that the demon had taken notice of Liam's presence as he lowered his head and murmured. Who are you? Liam was able to hear the demon's voice clearly despite the chaos that was occurring on the battlefield. They sounded to him like soft, sinister whispers. Thin blue threads began to crackle around his body, while his eyes took on a yellowish hue. His vision became distorted as everything turned black, leaving behind only white wisps in his vision. Each wisp varied in size, with the spot where the previous demon stood being the largest and covering his entire field of vision with a brilliant white hue. Amazing, Liam thought while staring at the demon. He could feel the back of his neck rise as a result of the power emanating from him. Nonetheless, he wasn't scared. He had seen his fair share of powerful demons throughout his life, and the demon in front of him was no different from those he had previously encountered. Plus, no one can be compared to him. The prince ranked the demon he had met on the previous planet. The one planet that took away Small Snake's life. When compared to him, the demon that stood in front of him was nothing to write home about. He was still extremely powerful, but not to the point where it left him helpless like the prince-ranked demon. I want to see just how much stronger I've become. Liam started removing his sword from its scabbard in a methodical and careful manner as if his face turned extremely serious. His vision gradually returned to normal, and the crackling sound made by the thin white lightning bolts became even more intense. Almost immediately after that, Liam's vision started to blur. And the next thing he knew, he was suddenly standing in front of the demon. He only threw a straightforward slash, but the demon was able to easily parry it away with his hand. The demon cocked his head slightly before launching his own attack, which was directed directly toward Liam's neck and came at a sharp angle. Fast, Liam thought to himself. Nevertheless, he had already seen it coming as a white line formed in his blackened line of sight that came as a result of him activating the power of his eyes. And he cocked his head to the side, easily avoiding the demon's attack, much to the surprise of the demon. The lightning that was circling Liam's body crackled even more fiercely, and he slashed once more in the direction of the demon's body. Shying. The second attack he launched was significantly swifter and more powerful than the first one he had thrown, and it once more left the demon in a state of bewilderment. Flying. When Liam's sword made contact with the demon's hands, a powerful metallic ring reverberated through the atmosphere, and pressurized wind gales shot out from the point of contact between the two. The demon was pushed back and Liam once again attacked him. Boom. Boom. In the background, muffled sounds of explosions could be heard. The attacks were so ferocious and loud that the mana chamber shook as a result of their aftershocks. Ugh. I grit my teeth and suppressed the groan that was about to escape from my mouth. Fuck. My entire body seemed to be twitching uncontrollably as I felt a searing heat rising from the depths of my body. As the pores on my body completely opened up and eagerly absorbed the mana in the air, a whirlpool began to form around me in the process. My consumption of the herb brought about these effects. It wasn't one that helped me break through specifically, but rather helped me increase the rate at which I could absorb the mana that was in the air around me. Because I had consumed an excessive amount of herbs in an effort to progress, I was no longer able to keep up with such a method and was instead limited to using this method in order to force myself into the next rank. It hurt. It fucking hurt. But I could feel myself progressing. Slowly but steadily, I was starting to feel a subtle tingling sensation near the center of my chest. Almost. Clang. The human sword was once again stopped by Suriel's sharp nails. He is pretty powerful, Suriel thought as he gazed at the human before him. At this very moment he felt his sword graze his sharp nails. The sound that came as a result of the grinding wasn't anything too pleasant. Nonetheless, Suriel ignored it and focused his attention on the human's sword. He raised his pinky and tapped the sword's body for an instant. Then with a low grunt he flapped his wings and pushed the human far away from him. Ugh. The human flew several meters back before stopping. The hue that was coming out of his eyes glowed an even brighter shade of yellow. You are one strange human, Suriel mumbled all of a sudden as he lowered both of his arms. The human's face hardened for a moment, most probably out of confusion. Suriel continued. I don't exactly know what your power is, but it seems like you can move your body at speeds which leave even someone like me speechless and... Suriel's eyes narrowed as his head bobbed up and down while he studied the human carefully. More specifically, his eyes. It seems like your eyes are a bit special, I warned. He wasn't even able to finish his sentence before he felt a light breeze brush past him and the human appeared behind him. As if expecting his appearance, Suriel merely turned his head and cocked his head a little where a sharp sword shot past. An impatient one, I see. A leisurely smile spread across his face as he interlocked his hands behind his back. He took a step back and spoke. Do you want to know something? The human sword once again came whistling past his body. This time, Suriel was unable to dodge and he found a part of his wing get torn up a little. Speak less, fight more. I'm starting to get bored. The human's voice echoed inside Suriel's ears. True to his words, he really did sound bored from the tone of his voice. Suriel's face stiffened for a moment before he smiled once again. Very well then. He clapped his hands once and continued what he was saying. What was I about to say? Right, I was about to tell you which clan I belong to. Suriel skillfully avoided the human's sword as the smile on his face turned rather sinister and he licked his lips. I belong to the clan of Envy. Immediately after he said those words, he tapped the air. Huh. The human exclaimed in surprise following Suriel's actions as he turned his sword. His body came to a sudden stop while Suriel's smile deepened even further. Let's see. He extended his hand forward and clenched his hand. All of a sudden, the human's sword shattered and purple particles scattered in the air, falling gently against the human's body. All of this happened so fast that by the time he realized what had happened, it was already too late. Suriel slowly approached the human and asked, Now, shall we see exactly who you envy? What's going on? Liam looked at the demon standing in front of him with confusion. He remembered fighting against him when all of a sudden his sword shattered and a series of purple dots landed on his body. He did try to avoid them, but it was already too late by the time he realized what had happened. Strangely, I don't feel weird. Whatever the dots were, they didn't seem to be that dangerous. Yet, as he gazed in the demon's direction and more specifically at his wide smile, Liam had an ominous premonition. And it wasn't long before his premonition became true as the demon suddenly laughed out loud. This was a lot easier than I had expected. As soon as his laughter ceased, he turned his attention to Liam. Alright, let's see the result of my work. All of a sudden, under Liam's gaze, the demon started to morph. His skull started to wiggle and so did the bones in his body. The whole transformation was rather grotesque as blood started leaking out and a foul smell pervaded the air. It was reminiscent of something one would only see in horror movies. It was disgusting, especially the foul smell that was lingering in the air. It was anything but pleasant. I should probably attack him now. As Liam continued to stare at the demon in front of him, he reflected on the situation. If he attacked right now, he would almost certainly come out on top. That is, unless it was some kind of trick or trap. But it didn't look like it to Liam. Far from it actually, as the demon truly looked vulnerable at the moment. Liam felt his hand twitch as another sword appeared in his hand. If I attack him now, he will get injured for sure. He probably wouldn't die, but he would definitely get injured. Liam's foot pressed forward. Ugh. Just as he was about to step again, he stopped himself. Never mind, that wouldn't be fun. He suddenly let out a yawn. Scratching the back of his head, Liam shook his head in disappointment. Who am I kidding? This is the first time in a while that I can have some fun, and I'm not about to throw it away. Stupid. Liam's found the whole situation stupid. Sure, his decision was also stupid, but he quite frankly didn't care. If he attacked his opponent now and dealt him some damage, he would without a doubt have a chance at beating him. But he chose not to do so. Reason? Because it wasn't fun. Then again, stupid as it was, this was Liam's nature, and he perfectly understood how stupid his decision was. Not that he cared. Why should he care in the first place? His sole purpose for living was to fight against strong opponents. Remove that from the equation and he would just be an empty shell. In the first place, didn't he leave the human domain and go to the demon realm because he was bored? What was the point of living if there was no purpose? Since I can't fight against Ren all the time and we're both limited to our environment, it would truly be a waste for me to throw such an opportunity away. Truly. Well, this is unexpected. A familiar voice woke Liam up from his slight daze. His brows immediately furrowed upon hearing the demon's voice. Huh. Lifting his head up, Liam was left stunned by what he saw. Deep blue eyes, black hair, rather buff yet lean body. What's going on? Slowly opening his mouth, he called out. Rin. Chapter 643 War. 5. Is he sharper than I let out, or is he just stupid? Suriel pondered to himself as he gazed at the human standing not so far from him. In the previous few moments, right when he was morphing his body, he sensed a slight murderous intent coming from the human. He thought that he would attack him. If there was a time when he was most vulnerable, it would indeed be during his transformation, so Suriel found it surprising that he didn't attack him. Did he sense something? In truth, the human would have most likely suffered severe injuries or even died had he chosen to attack. The fact that he didn't do anything had in itself saved his life. Suriel was not so dim-witted as to allow the human to take advantage of such a glaring weakness in his defenses. He was obviously prepared. This new body isn't too bad. Suriel shifted his attention toward his new body. He repeatedly clenched and unclenched his fists before raising his head to look at the human who was staring back at him with a look filled with surprise. The grin that was already on his face grew wider. This is the existence you envy? He asked while moving around in this new body of his. Suriel was a member of the Envy clan. A duke ranked one at that. What made the clan of Envy the strongest of the other clans was the unique power a certain part of their members had. Envy, lust, gluttony, pride, greed, wrath, and sloth. Each clan represented a sin, and with it they were born with an innate power that was only unique to their clan, and that perfectly matched their sin. In Suriel's case, his power was that of someone who, by looking through the memories of their adversary, could flawlessly imitate the person that their adversary envied. In this case, it was the form that he had just copied. It took a total of 10 seconds for Suriel to get used to the new body, and when he did, he felt everything become clear as information started to flood his mind. They were a bit scattered as there seemed to be something wrong with the person's memories, but they were enough for Suriel to absorb and assimilate with himself. He is indeed a person worth envying. He extended his hand, at which point a sword composed of tangible demonic energy materialized. Suriel slowly assumed his position as he locked eyes with the human standing opposite him. Let us see the power of the human that you envy, shall we? Click. Fuck off. Hein let out a resounding roar as his shield collided with a nearby demon, knocking the demon to the ground with a loud crash. The next thing that he did was stomp on the demon's head with his foot. After hearing a familiar cracking sound, he dashed forward. where he was followed by the simultaneous assault of 5 demons. Boom. Hein did not move from his position and instead fixed his gaze on the demons that were in front of him. The moment their eyes locked, both of them took on more vicious and bloodthirsty expressions. Hyuk. Quack. Hein extended his hand and swiped in a horizontal manner. There was a pile-up on the ground of several severed heads due to the result of his actions. Hein manipulated the flame scions in the air with the flick of his finger, and as a result, the demons' bodies burned to a crisp, exposing 5 unblemished cores. He didn't think twice about destroying them as he stomped on them with his foot. Bang. Uck. Hein suddenly groaned as a demon appeared from his right side and attacked him. He was fortunately able to block the attack with just his body. There's so many. Not even a second after killing 5 demons and 10 more were at him. The numbers. They seemed endless. Fuck this shit. He let out a resounding shout as he pounded his shield against the ground with one single large movement. Hua. Boom. The ground began to fracture and a powerful shockwave propagated outward, forcing the demons that were around him to spread apart. Hein took advantage of the opportunity that presented itself in that split second by pressing his foot against the ground and propelling his body in the direction of the demon that was closest to him. Hyuk. His shield slashed the demon into 2. Without taking a single break, he twisted his body and the head of a nearby demon detached, falling to the ground. As the blood continued to pool on his shield, it didn't take long before it turned black in color. With no time to care about the cores, Hein crushed the head of the demon with his foot and kicked toward his right. Like a whip, his foot smacked against a demon's neck, sending it crashing against the ground. Be it fist, foot, shield, head, Hein used everything that he had at his disposal to kill the demons around him. Looks like learning from Han Yufei wasn't that bad of an idea after all. His current fighting ability came as a result of Han Yufei teaching him martial arts. Hein had the realization quite some time ago that merely defending himself was not going to be sufficient. He needed to find ways to deal with his opponent, which was why he had asked Han Yufei for assistance. Han Yufei was happy to assist him in exchange for something similar. Now that I think of it, this isn't nearly as bad as my time with Han Yufei. He shuddered involuntarily at the memory of his battles with Han Yufei. It was bearable at first, but the guy. He was inhuman at this point. Hein feared him more than Liam and Ren. Initially he was manageable. However, after practicing some strange art, he became impossible to fight against. Not only would the training grounds be left in shambles, but the manner in which he fought left absolutely no room for Hein to take a breath at any point in time. Hein was powerless to stop Han Yufei from his endless onslaught. All he could do was brace himself and wait for his stamina to run out. However, this never seemed to happen throughout their spars, as Han Yufei never seemed to run out of stamina. He was quite simply a monster. Still, it's all thanks to him that I have improved so much. Hein bitterly smiled and took a deep breath. Eyeing the demons in front of him, his eyes sharpened and his shield started to glow. Steel domain. The glow around his shield became brighter, and it wasn't long before the shield split into 5 different sized pieces. They began hovering around him, and while Hein grunted once, the shields began to grow in size with the assistance of Hein's mana, which was attached to the shield's side in the form of a translucent tangible material. It wasn't long before he had 5 hovering shields, centered by a part of his previous shield. Down. Hein gestured with his fingers and the shields bowed with their apexes facing outward. All of this transpired in a fraction of a second, and with a twist of his hands, the shields began to encircle his body with increasing velocity. He then extended his hand forward and the radius around him expanded. Heek. Hyuk. Black rain started pouring shortly after as agonized screams accompanied the rain. The scene was extremely gruesome, with limbs flying everywhere around Hein. However, he didn't have time to care about this as he could feel his mana dwindling at an alarming rate. It was depleting so fast that he couldn't even process the disgust he was feeling in his stomach. This is a lot more exhausting than I thought. Hein started to grit his teeth. At the rate he was going, he didn't see how he could survive for more than 20 minutes. It sounded like a lot of time, but in reality, it was practically nothing in comparison to a war that would probably last quite a long time. If that wasn't all. Boom. Hein was taken aback by an unexpected explosion, during which he felt a powerful force blast against his shield, and he was forced to retreat. Irk. The shields that were rotating around Hein fell to the ground in a helpless manner as he skidded back several meters. Spurt. Feeling a sweet sensation down his throat, Hein suddenly found himself spitting blood. Fuck shit. He wiped his lips and slowly raised his head up, at which point he was confronted with the sight of a demon looking in his direction. Hein could tell with just a glance that the demon in front of him was no regular demon. All the demons that were previously attacking him had long stopped attacking him and had shifted their attention away. What do we have here? A sinister whisper echoed in the air. Who? In response to the demon's gaze, Hein noticed a change in the rhythm of his breathing. Marquis. Shivers ran down Hein's body. The rank of the demon became apparent in his mind, and his body shuddered even more fiercely. He could barely raise his head as the demon scrutinized his body carefully. You shouldn't have stood out so much. His eerie and sinister voice once again echoed inside Hein's head. Had you not stood out so much, I would have never have found you. The voice suddenly sounded a lot closer. Unbeknownst to Hein, the demon was already a couple of meters away from him. Fast. Hein thought as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He wasn't even able to tell how the demon had gotten so close to him. Hein's complexion paled and his body abruptly twisted in the direction of where the voice came. But it was unfortunately too late. Ugh. He felt a powerful force press against his abdomen and his body flew several meters back until he crashed against the ground. Bang. Fuck. Hein cursed out loud as he felt every part of his body ache. He slowly lifted his head up to stare at the demon that was slowly approaching his direction. No, slow was an understatement. By the time Hein blinked, he was already upon him. With his extended hand, he ruthlessly swiped at Hein's face, trying to end his life in an instant. Kish. Hein felt his life flash across his eyes as he stared at the approaching claws. The claws soon reached Hein. New. Clay. Chapter 644 War 6. It all should have ended with a swipe of my hand. That was what Mercurian, a Marquis-ranked demon, thought as he swiped down at the human before him. He had a rather strong body. One that was difficult to break with a single attack and that required quite a bit of strength in spite of him being a rank lower. Even so, it should not have been impossible for Mercurian to overcome. In the end, orcs had a similar level of toughness and he was easily able to kill them. Clay. Mercurian was taken aback when he felt his claws strike something solid and felt a vibration emanating from his hand as a result of the impact. What's going on? He wondered aloud as he lowered his head to look at the human. At this precise moment, Mercurian was astounded to see that the human's body had turned completely black, and thin yellow lines began to appear around the human's body. They glowed a faint tint of yellow and brought rise to an indescribable sense of oppression. What's going on? Mercurian stared in disbelief as he sensed that something was off about the situation. Bang! Before he could even begin to make sense of what was happening, he felt a strong force envelop his entire body as he was pushed several meters backward. Hayak! Itchy. It hurts. As Hein laboriously gulped for air, he was suddenly overcome with excruciating pain throughout his entire body. Particularly, he was able to feel the throbbing and searing pain in his veins, making it hard for him to even utter a couple of words. Nonetheless, with the pain came an indescribable amount of power. Ayaka! Hein yelled out in agony as the muscles in his right hand began to twitch in an uncontrollable manner. He was starting to lose focus and his vision was starting to blur. The pain was that intense. Damn it! I didn't expect to use this so early into the war. Hein muttered a curse under his breath as the shaking in his right knee and the growing darkness in his vision continued. Remember, Hein, don't ever use it unless you're in danger. Since you are only learning about the body part, using it will result in excruciating pain that will make you want to commit suicide. Hein started recalling a few words Han Yufei had told him in the past. Not only that, since you haven't fully mastered it yet, the pain will be even worse than I can describe. Remember, don't ever use the Gravar style unless your life is really in danger. I should have listened to him. Hein let out a strained laugh. The Gravar style. Yes, what Hein was currently using at the moment was the Gravar style. Well, at least a small part of it. He couldn't actually learn the Graver style since he didn't use the sword and it didn't fit his fighting style. However, with Han Yufei's permission, he was able to learn a small part of it. The part that focused on the body. Ugh. The throbbing only got worse with time. I don't have much time. The 20 minutes he previously had now turned to a couple of minutes. Hein was aware that he was in a difficult situation. However, when confronted by a demon with the rank of Marquis, he knew that he could not show any restraint at all. Boom. With just a single step, the ground beneath him tore into shreds and his vision distorted. Before he knew it, he was in front of the Marquis-ranked demon. He raised his arm and, curling his hand into a fist, he punched with all he had. His movements were so fast that when he threw a fist, the demon could do nothing but stay firm on his spot as he crossed his arms together to block the attack. Hyuk. As a result of Hein's attack, the demon was forced to retreat several meters in the opposite direction. When he finally came to a stop, he had a look of complete and utter surprise on his face. How? He wondered aloud while maintaining a blank expression on his face. However, before he could even begin to comprehend what was taking place, Hein appeared in front of him once more and delivered another powerful punch. Bang! Hein's attacks were relentless. He didn't even leave a single moment for the demon to catch his breath. His fighting style perfectly resembled Han Yufei's. Relentless and destructive. The only difference was that Hein was slowly losing strength with each second that passed. Nonetheless, it was enough for him to deal severe damage to the demon. Boom. Hein smashed the demon's head against the ground with his hand while his right foot pinned the demon's body to the ground. Heek. When the demon crashed into the ground, he let out a pitiful screech and his eyes widened in shock as he stared at the ground in disbelief. How is this possible? Hein was able to tell what the demon was thinking simply by observing the expression on his face as he mounted the demon's body and began to punch the demon with everything he had. Bang. One punch. Bang. A second punch. Bang. A third punch. As the demon's head was smacked to one side and then the other, the pace of the punches began to quicken and eventually reached a frenetic state. The blows were so powerful that the demon couldn't even scream as his eyes rolled back into his head and blood flew everywhere. Keish. This should be enough. When Hein had already delivered his 15th punch within a span of 2 seconds, he could feel his body on fire and realized that he needed to put an end to the situation at this very instant. He had to put an end to things right away if he wanted any chance of surviving this and making it out alive. He raised his hand and made preparations to put an end to everything right at this very moment. His hand frozen in midair as he was about to swing it. Hein blinked once, and during that brief moment his eyes came into contact with those of the demon. It came as a complete shock to Hein when the demon's eyes, which had previously been red, suddenly turned yellow. At the same time, Hein felt his entire body suddenly become lethargic. Are you feeling tired? The demon opened his mouth and his voice quietly entered Hein's head in a low whisper. The corners of Hein's eyes began to droop, and the hand that was still in the air appeared to be on the verge of falling at any moment. You've had your fun with me already, haven't you? I think it's enough, don't you think? The demon's voice continued to ring inside of Hein's head like multiple whispers. Right, I'm indeed tired. Hein murmured inwardly as he heard the demon's voice. The demon's eyes began to shine with an even greater brilliance, and Hein's hand, which had been raised earlier, began to slowly lower itself. I know that you have used a lot of energy, how about you go to sleep? I think you deserve some sleep after everything that you did. The demon's voice gradually became softer over the course of the conversation, and Hein didn't even notice when his eyelids began to close before it was too late. Right, he is right. The demon's words made sense in his mind. At this point his strength and stamina were almost entirely depleted. As a matter of fact, his mental clarity had already begun to diminish well before this moment. He hadn't been able to think clearly in quite some time, and the voice of the demon completely resonated with what he was experiencing on the inside. Not only that, but he somehow felt even more tired when the demon's eyes turned yellow. How about you take a small nap? I think you deserve it. I agree. Hein mumbled something as he eventually nodded his head and closed his eyes before collapsing next to the demon with a soft thud. Thud dash. Mercurian exhaled deeply as he felt the weight of the human being lifted off of his body. The glow that had been in his eyes vanished, and as soon as it did, he jerked his head around to glare at the human that had been beating on him from above just a moment ago. How embarrassing, he quietly mumbled. For a Marquis-ranked demon like him to suffer such an embarrassing beatdown, he felt various emotions. Shame, anger, resentment. This human is dangerous. He slowly stood up and looked at the human who was passed out on the ground. Mercurian was a member of the Sloth clan, and he had a lingering fear that if he hadn't been able to use his abilities at the precise moment that he did, it could have been him lying on the ground instead of the human. Naturally, the idea that he was going to die never entered his head at any point in time. He was a marquee-ranked demon while his opponent wasn't. Despite his sudden rise in strength, it still wasn't enough to deal with the large gap in rank the two of them had. Sure, he did get beaten down on the ground, but that was all part of his plan. He just needed to find the opportune time to use his powers and render his opponent immobile through the usage of his powers. And he succeeded. Let's get rid of him. Mercurian glanced at the battlefield around him and decided to kill the human in front of him. His next set of actions was rather quick. Raising his foot, he stomped toward the human's head. Or at least tried to. The moment his foot was about to crush the human's skull into a pulp, it suddenly froze in the middle of the air, preventing it from doing its intended damage. What's going on? Mercurian slowly turned his head, and as he did so, his eyes fell upon a beguiling figure that had two large horns growing out of her head. Her eyes had a rosy gleam that shone brightly. "If you don't mind, how about letting him go?" Her seductive voice echoed throughout the air as she slowly made her way toward Mercurian. "What?" Mercurian gave a single blink of his eye as he caught a glimpse of the demon approaching him from behind. When he felt something out of the ordinary, his heart began to race, but he was unable to move, and all he could feel was his head slowly nodding. "How sweet of you." The demoness murmured something in his ear in a low voice. Before Mercurian could even realize what was happening, she was already standing in front of him. Leaning her head closer to his ear once again, she whispered something else. "Now that we're at it, why don't you do me another favor?" Mercurian experienced chills down his back as he listened to her words, but it seemed as though his body was frozen in place and he was unable to move at all. The demoness tilted her head to the side and smiled seductively in his direction. She lowered her voice and cocked her head slightly as she spoke. "Why don't you die?" Everything turned black after that. Chapter 645 War 7. Jean leaped into the air as he snuck toward 5 marquee-ranked demons who were a little farther away from the other marquee-ranked demons who had made the decision to advance a little in order to scope the war. Some of them had even actively joined the war, trying to balance the situation as Ren's members were wreaking havoc at the very front. Their very presence was tilting the balance of the war as they massacred hundreds of demons at a time. I should also play a role. With his rank being S-rank, Jean now had the ability to fly as he skipped through the air in a secretive manner. Nearing the demons, he activated his first skill. Absolute Stealth, B. The user can completely conceal their breathing, heartbeat, and noise as well as their physical form upon activating this skill. Over the years, Jean had acquired many different skills. Most of them came from his guild. At times as a reward for all of his accomplishments, and at other times as a gift from his parents and grandfather. He used to be very hesitant about taking skills in the past as he wanted to prove to the others that he didn't need the guild in order to be the best. But as he grew up and he thought back on his previous thoughts, he could only shake his head and lament about how stupid and naive his thoughts were. If you are born with an advantage, use it. He was born with a golden spoon ever since he was little. Perhaps because of others' jealousy and how they claimed that the only reason he was strong was because of his grandfather and all of the potions he was fed as a child, Jean began to believe their words, giving rise to his edgy teen phase where he would think of everyone as his enemy. He had long grown past that phase. He now knew better than anyone that the only opinion that mattered was his. It was his life, not theirs. What right did they have to say anything about his life? Just the thought of how he had been manipulated in the past brought rise to a hidden anger within him. Fortunately, I realized it early. All he needed was one wake-up call to learn of this, and from there, Jean decided to use the one advantage he had over the others and acquire the best skills he could through his guild. Not only that, but he also learned the best arts that the guild had to offer. Of course, he only learned those that would benefit him, and he didn't just learn all of the arts for the sake of learning them. If only I could have practiced everything earlier. Just thinking back at all the time he had wasted with his worthless pride gave rise to a high sense of disappointment in himself. What a waste. Phew. His body emerged from behind a marquee-ranked demon. There were a total of 5 marquee-ranked demons scattered around him, and none of them took notice of his presence. Appearing from behind the demon, Jin's eyes changed as 5 different red shooting targets appeared in his vision. Axiom Lock Us. The user gains the ability to see through the opponent's axis, pivots, and center of gravity, granting them a significant advantage in combat. As he fiddled with the 2 daggers in his hands, a circular domain started to spread out from his body, until it began to encircle the area around him as well as the marquee ranked demon. Domain of Silence. Constructs a domain around the user that prevents all noise from escaping. The domain was invisible. Only Jin had the ability to see it expand from out of his body, and encircling the area around him and the demon. The next set of actions all happened in a flash. With his eyes darting all over the targets, Jin's hands flashed, and the dagger in his hand pierced right through every single spot marked in his vision. The demon screamed out loud, but no noise came out of his mouth. If that wasn't enough, by the time Jin was done attacking the marquee-ranked demon, the demon found himself unable to move as the ligaments of both his arms and legs had been torn. A long line spread across his neck and his wings had been cut. The last thing the demon felt was a hand piercing through his head. After that, everything went dark. That's one. Jin silently murmured to himself as his eyes narrowed. Killing this demon was the easiest part. The hardest part was what followed after. After all, although he had the skills that granted him the ability to kill someone silently, it did not camouflage his kill. Within the next 2 seconds, one of the demons near him would definitely notice that something was wrong and warn the others. Thus, Jin's figure suddenly appeared in front of another demon after briefly disappearing. This time he decided not to use his A-ranked skill, Domain of Silence, and instead just attacked with his right hand, which was holding a sharp dagger in it. On the other hand, his other hand, which was empty, was extended toward the left side. His hand gradually took on a shadowy appearance as a dark haze began to envelop it. Thin threads started to shoot from the tip of his hand, aiming toward 2 nearby marquee-ranked demons. All of this happened within the short 2-second span that he had given himself. By the time the demons realized that something was wrong, the threads had already reached them and had locked onto their respective necks like sharp daggers. Jin was hugging a demon from behind while pressing a dagger against his neck. On the other hand, his left hand, which was extended toward the 2 other marquee-ranked demons, had thin black threads that encircled their necks. 3 out of 4 of the remaining demons were locked under his control within that short period of time, and by the time the 4th demon turned around to see what was going on, he was met with the sight of Jin's cold eyes. Spurt, spurt, spurt. A fountain of black blood began to spray in the air as the demons stared at Jin with a look of absolute dread. What? What was happening before the demon's eyes seemed impossible. It was completely beyond his common sense. He had just turned around to look at the battle at the front, only to be shocked to see that his comrades had all been incapacitated. All of this happened so fast that he had been unable to react at all. How? The demon thought to himself as he moved back a little. His eyes were filled with absolute horror and dread. Thump, thump, thump. 3 muffled sounds echoed beneath as Jin dropped the bodies of the demons onto the ground. In his hand were 3 perfectly shaped cores, which disappeared with a flick of his finger. Just like that, Jin had gotten rid of 4 marquee-ranked demons. What was happening right now was no coincidence. This was the product of Jin's hard work. He understood just how big the gap between him and Ren was. His goal used to be to chase after him, but he realized that that was stupid. Fundamentally, Ren was not him. Ren was a swordsman and Jin was more of an assassin. The weapons they used were different, and so was the way they fought. It was upon this realization that everything became clear to Jin. I'll just focus on improving what I'm good at instead of trying to catch up to Ren. He might not be the best swordsman around, but he sure as hell was going to be the strongest assassin there was. And the fact that he could kill 4 marquee-ranked demons when his strength was the same as theirs was a testament to just how strong he had gotten over the years. He's pretty good, Emma murmured as she looked toward the sky where Jin was. Currently he was face to face with a marquee-ranked demon. She witnessed, alongside Melissa, him dispatch 4 marquee-ranked demons in a matter of a minute. His strength had honestly left her stunned. I wonder just how much effort he must have put in over the years to become this strong. Without a doubt, Jin's talent wasn't the only thing that had led to him becoming this strong. She knew better than anyone that effort and dedication were the necessary requirements for one to become strong. A bitter smile spread across her face as she thought about the effort she put in. Haha, I wonder if my efforts are still not enough? The reason why she wanted to become strong was so that she wouldn't be a burden for Kevin. But it didn't seem like he appreciated her efforts, as he seemed to have put some distance from her over the last few years. She didn't realize why at first, and the thought saddened her, but upon further reflection she realized that it was most likely because he still found her a burden and that he was most probably putting on a distance with her so that she wouldn't get hurt. Well, at least that was what she forced herself to think. After all, there was no way Kevin would abandon her. Right? Oi, wake up. Ouch. A slap at the back of her head was what snapped her out of her thoughts. She hastily turned her head and glared in Melissa's direction. What was that for? Huh? Melissa looked at her with a look that said, "Are you seriously asking me something so obvious?" while she pointed at the battlefield. Falling into a daze when there's a war going on? Did you get hurt before coming here? Emma put on an embarrassed look. She lowered her head and whispered, "You're right. No shit, I'm right." Ruthless as ever, Melissa didn't hold her punches as she continued to rant. "I get that you're having some relationship troubles, but there is a time for everything, and now is not the time to think about this type of stuff. How did you dash? It doesn't matter how I know. The device I set up around us isn't going to last forever. The core is already running out of energy, so you better get ready to fight soon." Melissa took out several flasks from her dimensional space, all of which had different colored substances hidden inside. She opened one and handed it to Emma. "Here, drink this, it will help you fight better." "What's this?" Emma asked out of curiosity. Melissa shoved it at her and answered, "Just drink it. I'm not going to poison you." "All right then." Emma drank the potion under Melissa's gaze. Huh. She felt a sudden burst of strength. Her eyes opened wide in shock as she gazed at Melissa. Don't ask questions. You wouldn't understand even if I told you what I did." She tossed several different colored cards in Emma's direction, after which she crouched down on the ground and tapped onto a small device set up on the ground. "Get ready, in the next few seconds we will be assaulted from all sides. Make sure you don't die." "Why dash?" Melissa tapped onto the device before Emma could finish her sentence, and all of a sudden she felt thousands of different eyes pause on her body. Chills ran down her body. "Fuck, Melissa." As the shaking in the room became more intense and my heart began to twitch, I let out a scream. Wakak. At the same time, the room began to shake even more fiercely. This was especially true for the pillars, which were shaking so violently that it appeared as though they could topple over at any moment. Bang. Not yet. I pounded the ground with my fist and clenched my teeth tightly. I shut my eyes and concentrated on the mana that was entering my body. I continued to control its movements within my body in order to make sure that everything was operating as it should. A single mistake and I was fucked. When I shut my eyes to examine the state of my body, I was delighted to reach the conclusion that I was only a few seconds away from breaking through. Immediately after I realized this, my eyes snapped open and I hastily chewed on another herb. Wakak. As if scalding lava was traveling through my veins, my body jerked up and I let out a heart-wrenching scream. The scream was so loud that it drowned out the sound of the explosions coming from the war, and it wasn't long before I suddenly heard a cracking sound inside of the room. Zir. Everything changed after that.